Welcome. This is Jody from Hesperidium Stitches, and we are going to have a tutorial for the Aurora mitts. So some of the things that you're going to need: stitch markers, a measuring tape, some scissors, a darning needle, and some thread or yarn to use to hold your stitches, a category 3 yarn, and some DPNs or magic loop needles, something along those lines. I'm using 2.25. I like my mitts to be a little dense. Okay, so the yarn that we're using is considered a category 3. It is the Lion brand ice cream, and it feels a little bit more like a sport weight to me, but in the long scheme of things, the gauge matters less because you can highly customize these mitts. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create the thumb panel, and then from the thumb panel we will knit out and around the hands and connect back. So I use a provisional cast on because I prefer to use live stitches instead of picking up stitches that have already been cast off wherever I can. And I use the Judy's Magic cast on. So this is the cast on that I learned to do toe up socks. There are many different places online to learn this if you find my demonstration confusing. So I'm going to use 2 DPNs spaced apart, and I'm going to hold the yarn similar to how I hold it with a long tail cast on. So I'm going to bring the end up through my ring, my pointer finger and my middle finger around my thumb and hold it. That would be Polly in the background. With the 2 DPNs, I'm going to take them and put it through the middle. The top gets pushed down, and you can see it wraps around the first needle on the right. And then we're going to take the top one by our pointer finger, wrap it around the bottom one, move it over, and you'll see we're coming to the yarn that's on our thumb. We're going to slide it between the two and around. You're going to come over and twist it back and go through. And we're going to work back and forth like this until we have 15 stitches on both needles. Okay, let's see where we are. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. So come up. We have 14 and 14 and 15 and 15. So with the Judy's Magic cast on, it does leave your ends loose. I prefer to knot them. So I'm holding them with the other finger, bringing them around and tying a knot. Depending on your yarn and how well it holds, that might suffice. I usually do it twice. That way to hold it nice and secure. So as we were casting on, this was our front. However, this will now become the back of our work. We're going to flip our needles over so both ends are on the right hand side. I'm going to pull them through there, and you'll see this ridge here. This ridge created is going to be the first ridge of our mitts. I'm going to take a marker and just slide it through one of those stitches. This will help us denote the front and help us keep track of our ridges. So Since I like to keep my stitches live, this bottom needle isn't needed, and it actually will make things more awkward from now on. So I'm going to take my darning needle and some waste yarn, and that bottom needle here, we're just going to put those stitches on hold. Not going to lie, it is a little fiddly to do, but it makes it much easier to work with. You always do have the option, if you prefer, you don't have to do a provisional cast on. The provisional cast on for me makes it easier to pick up the stitches when we're going to do the trim at the bottom, or if you want to add it to be longer, but also it adds with the stretch. So your live stitches are going to be far stretchier than ones that were picked up later that were already either bound off or created without the provisional cast on. Okay, gonna pull that through, and now you can see we have our bottom stitches on waste yarn. Just gonna cut this because we don't need our needle connected anymore, and place that over there. So this first part right here is actually going to be the part right here. So this edge is going to be however far you want it to go down. And we're just gonna knit straight until we get to right about the line on our wrist. In the pattern, we're going to make the, what would be the medium size, which in general would be like average size for a woman probably. So we're gonna knit just plain back and forth until we have 16 ridges on this front section. That's including this ridge we already created by the cast on. So we're gonna pull our tail to the side, and we're not gonna do any special stitches on the edge. We're just gonna knit across for every row. I find it actually easier to pick up the edge garter stitches without doing anything fancy like slipping stitches. I think once you actually learn how to pick up garter ridge edges, which a lot of patterns do not explain or explain very well, took me a lot of practice to figure out where the best stitches were to pick up when a pattern didn't specify where to pick them up. But I actually think that the edges of garter ridges are easier to pick up than anything like slip stitches because they don't actually leave holes if your garter stitch was knit at a dense enough gauge. So you reach the end, we're just gonna flip it over and we're gonna knit back. And as you can tell, I am not a fast knitter. That's okay. Okay, we've reached our end. I'm gonna flip it around. And as you can see, now on our front section, we have the first ridge on the marker and we have the second ridge. We're just going to continue to knit even back and forth until we end up with our yarn on the right side and we have 16 ridges. And I'll meet you back here for that. Okay, so we're back with our 16 ridges. You can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We are also on our front now. So like we mentioned before, this is going to be this part. If you would like this part shorter or longer, this is the time you would now want to do it. You'd either want to knit less than 16 ridges, or you could always make it longer and knit longer. The one thing you're going to want to keep in mind is as we knit our hand across, this is going to be a straight area. So if your arm is much wider than your hand, it is going to mean that that palm area is going to need to stretch more. So now that we've did the wrist portion of the thumb panel, we're actually going to start increasing for your thumb gusset. So most people's thumbs start to slowly angle right at the wrist area. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a gusset within this panel. This is one of the reasons why I like to do an odd number on this panel. It's just because it gives us a good middle ground. So since we have 15 stitches across, we're going to knit 7. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I like to keep track of where we're going. So for our wrist section being over, just gonna put a marker on the ridge so we know where exactly we're starting the thumb gusset. Okay, so now we're gonna knit 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I'm going to take a marker and place that there. The type of increase that I do in the pattern, I abbreviate as a YOT, and that's a yarn over going over the top. So with yarn overs, you have 2 ways you can do it. You can come from the bottom and loop around. This will situate your stitches the same way the stitches on the needle already are. But the type of yarn over that we do in the pattern is we take the yarn and we loop it from the back over to the top. Now this will situate your yarn basically in a twisted stitch style, and it will be backwards from the way your other needles are on, your other stitches are on the needle. The reason we do this is because this actually uses up less yarn and makes our increase more invisible because it leaves a smaller hole. So we're going to do the yarn over the top. We're going to knit 1 as our middle thumb gusset stitch, and then we are going to do another yarn over the top. We're going to take one of our markers and we're going to place that right there. This way our gusset is now confined by markers and is easily visible. And then we're going to knit the next 7 stitches. As with the rows we've previously knit, we're not doing anything special on the edge. We're just turning and we're going to knit across. So we'll knit those first 7 stitches. We're going to slip our marker, and you'll notice here it's more visible that the stitch is backwards. We are going to still take the leg that's closest to us, go through, and we're going to knit that stitch. you can see from the back, you've now created a twisted stitch. But on the front, thanks to our garter, it's going to look like a normal stitch. We're going to knit that middle stitch in the middle of the gusset. Same thing with our other yarn over the top. Our legs are situated backwards. We're still going to knit on that leg that's closest to us, not the one that's most forward. And we knit through. You can see again, twisted on the back. We're going to slip our marker and knit to the end. And try not to lose stitches like I just did. Okay, so now if we look at it from the front, we can see there's 3 stitches in between the marker, but it doesn't visibly look very different. On the back, you can see where our increase is definitely, but that's the inside of our mitt. It doesn't really matter as much. So we're going to increase every other ridge. So this is our first ridge in the thumb gusset section. So on our second ridge, which is an even ridge, we're just going to knit across the row. We're not doing any type of increasing. If you'd rather think of it by rows instead of ridges, you're going to increase on row 1, and then for the next 3 rows, just slipping our marker there, for the next 3 rows, you're just going to knit even. Slip our next marker. You might be able to hear in the background my fish aquarium and my beagle snoring. Okay, this is the back of the second ridge. We're just knitting across. Oops. Looks like I got it snagged there on the other stitch. There we go. Slip our marker. Slip our next marker. Okay, you'll see now we have up above our marker, you have 1, 2 ridges. This is going to be our repeat for the thumb gusset section. So you're going to knit your first ridge. First row has an increase, second ridge is even. I'll show you again. So on these following rows, you're going to knit 7, or you can think of it as knitting to the marker. We're going to slip our marker, and we're going to take our yarn, come up from the back, over the top, and around, and then we're going to knit the 3 stitches that are between the markers. Again, for our increase, I'm going to come up over the back and around the front. We're going to slip our marker, and we are going to knit across those 7 stitches. Sorry, just kind of moving my beagle a little bit there. Okay, sorry about that. We're going to turn, and this is going to be our second row, or the back of the second ridge. And we're going to knit across. Whoops, sorry. Okay, now that we're at that marker, we're going to slip our marker. Again, we're taking the leg of the stitch that is on the top. We're going to knit through. We now have a twisted stitch on the back. We're going to knit across. We've hit our next increase stitch. We're knitting through the leg on the top, and we've created our twisted stitch. We're going to slip and knit the last 7 stitches. Okay, that was our third ridge in this section. And our fourth ridge, because it's an even number, is just going to be knitting across and back. For the medium size, we're going to continue in this pattern, doing the repeat of both ridges until we have 15 stitches in between our marker. And I will meet you back at that time. Okay, so we now have 15 stitches in between our markers. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. And this was accomplished in 14 ridges. So far, this is what we have. So we have to our wrist, and then the increase for our thumb. You can notice that it's not quite long enough to meet up there. So we're going to place a marker. So we know where we ended our increases. And we are going to knit for 4 ridges even. No increases, we're just adding extra length to our gusset. Okay, we are back and we have our 4 ridges after the thumb gusset increases. And we are now going to take the stitches that are between the markers and put them on waste yarn. So we have our extra yarn here. I'm going to cut off a chunk of that. Okay, we're going to put these extra stitches on waste yarn because otherwise, if we bound off, then our edge would end right here. And we're actually going to come back to these and knit up some so it actually covers some of the thumb. So we're going to knit our first 7 stitches. We are going to set our marker aside. And we're going to put these 15 on waste yarn. Pull our needle through. We can remove this other marker. Gonna cut because we do not need our needle on here anymore. Okay, so if you remember in the beginning of our gusset, we had one stitch from our normal thumb panel. So we're going to bring that back to the top of our thumb panel, and we're going to use the same type of increase. So we're going to bring the yarn from the back over the top, and then we are going to knit the next 7 stitches. I'm going to pull that a little bit snug. Okay, so this last full ridge that we have, we want to mark because we are now done with the sections of our thumb gusset. And this is just going to help us count the ridges that we're going to knit up after this. So let's flip this over. And we're going to knit across. We are going to knit our increased stitch the same way we did through the other part of our thumb. The leg that is on the top, you're going to go through, whoops, through, grab our yarn. You can see it's twisted on the back. And knit all the way across. Okay, so now you can see it should look like this. So far we've knit our wrist part, we've knit the gusset for our thumb, and we are now here. Per the pattern, we're going to knit 16 more ridges to come up here. If you want it to be longer or shorter, this is where you can alter those. If I'm not going to knit in addition to the top and just add an edge, I try to keep it to come about the last knuckle on my pinky, but everybody varies. So we're just going to knit straight because we're just adding length to get up to where we need to. So we have 1 ridge and we're going to knit 15 more for a total of 16 after the thumb gusset. And once we get there, we'll come back and work on the next part. Okay, we're back. We now have 16 ridges past our separation of the thumb gusset. And we're going to take some more of our yarn. And we are going to put these stitches on hold. Okay. Just cut our needle off. Okay, so it's gonna seem like it's not necessary to end our working yarn. However, it looks a lot cleaner when you pick up your stitches and knit the first row with the front facing. So we're going to disconnect or cut our working yarn, and then we're going to work on picking up our stitches here to knit our hand panel. One of the things they don't often talk about in patterns is that garter stitch has a direction. If you know the direction the garter was knit in, you can actually find the perfect stitch to pick up on the side. So, since it was knit in this direction, you'll look at the garter stitch. The edge stitches will always be on the top for the direction knit. So if we flip it upside down, we know this isn't the direction it was knit because the edge stitches sit on the bottom. So for every ridge we have, we're going to pick up a stitch. And we know what stitch that is because we always know that it is the top stitch because this is the direction it was knit in. So our first ridge, we go into the top stitch on the side. We don't want to catch, if we look closer here, we'll see this is our top stitch that we want to catch. We don't want to catch this right here because that really isn't a stitch at all. What it is when you wrap the yarn, when you turn from going from the front to the back, that's what that is. It isn't a real stitch. So we want to take it. We want to make sure that we are getting the top edge stitch on each ridge. Now we're just going to take our needle and slide it right under that stitch. This will create a nice flush fabric that does not have any holes. Depending on the length of your DPNs, if you're using them, this might be where you would like to switch to cable needles or needles to knit in the round, just because they'll be longer. As you can see the whole way up, we're grabbing the one that's on the top. And that's going to ring true even for our very last ridge. So our last ridge, you're going to want to take the working yarn and bring it over to the side, because the bottom, you'll see the bar that's coming out of, that is actually the stitch we want to grab. Not the yarn, but the bottom of where that stitch is coming out. So we have picked up all of our ridges along the edge of our thumb panel. We're going to take our yarn and we are just going to knit across. tuck that in a little, just to firm things up. So the wonderful thing about this type of construction is that because garter stitch is so stretchy, knitting the hand panel horizontal instead of vertically will leave a lot of room for stretch. This means that you potentially could have a variety of people wear the same glove, depending on how much stretch they prefer. But more importantly, it means that it's a little bit easier to get a fingerless mitt that will fit somebody without having their precise measurements. Or, on the other hand, it makes it a little bit easier if you're knitting for yourself or somebody you do have their measurements for, to make a glove that is more to their specifications, because you don't have to worry about ripping out the whole thing when this panel is going to decide just how snug it fits around the person's hand. And it's easy to either take out a couple ridges or add some more ridges, where you don't have to rip out a whole mitt that was knit from the top up or the top down. From the bottom up or the top down. Almost there. So on this hand panel, you're not actually going to be doing any increasing or decreasing or patterning for these mitts. You're just going to be knitting across the front and across the back to create your garter ridges. And we'll show in 1 second. Just trying to pull that end out of the way. There we go. Okay. So you see, we have our stitches live now. And you'll see that from picking them up from the front and grabbing the garter ridges as we do, it creates a nice finish on the top. You see on the back, we have more of a clear distinction where we picked up the stitches. But the front is nice and flush. So all you're going to do from here is you're going to knit back and forth to create your hand panel. And what you want to do is measure your hand across. So if you take your hand, I'll use the inches side for you guys. So as you can see, my hand across there is about 8 inches. I like my mitts to be snug. So what you're going to want to do is take your measurement of your hand, or you can always purchase the pattern over at Ravelry and see my suggestions. And you're just going to make sure that including the width of the thumb panel and your hand panel here, you're going to knit to a size that fits your hand well. So for mine, which my hand is 8 inches, I usually prefer, to have some negative ease of usually somewhere around 6.5 to 7 inches in my total circumference, because I like it to fit me nice and snug. And snug, so it's nice and warm. However, if you don't like it fitting that snug, you can always knit it more towards your actual measurement. What you'll want to do is, as you knit your panel here, see how much it stretches. The looser your gauge, the more it's going to stretch. The tighter your gauge, the less it's going to stretch. So from here, we're just going to knit back and forth to increase our hand panel. And when we get to our measurement that we want, we will meet back here. Okay, I just wanted to come back and mention that depending on whether you are doing stripes or you want your mitts to match, you may want to pick up a knit from a different side of the thumb panel. So on the previous one we just showed, we picked up our stitches on the right side of our thumb panel and knit out. You can also pick up on the left side of your thumb panel and knit out this way. And this will have, I'll show you a couple of things here. So here's one that's in the progress of working. Here you can see that we picked up on the right side and knit out. And here on this one, because I wanted the colors, you can see I started at similar spots in the skein. So the thumb panel actually grades in the same colors, but if you want your front and your back of your hands to match through the color gradations, you're going to want to pick up on different sides of the thumb panel. And that way you'll see that this way, when I put this one on, it moves this way. And if I put this one on, you can see that the tops and the insides will then match color-wise. So you're going to do that the same exact way. All you're going to do is take the thumb panel and pick up on the side that you actually need to. Same principle applies in the directionality of the garter stitch. So here, if you wanted to do it, if you're right-handed, you're going to make sure that towards the top, you're picking up the right topmost bump. So you're going to go through and pick the right bump. You're not going to pick the little tiny one on the edge, because remember that's where our yarn wrapped around when we turned our work to knit. So I just wanted to bring that through, that depending on how you're changing your color, you may want to switch for the different hands and pick up on a different side. That way your colors can match. Okay, since this one is already knit to the width that I need, and you'll see that from the edge of the needle, including the width of the thumb panel, it's a little less than 7 inches. You can also tell if you would prefer, if you're making it for yourself, you can always try it on. You're gonna wanna make sure to give it a good stretch. And for me, I like that snugness. So when you've reached the proper width for your hand, you're gonna cut your working yarn. And we're gonna be grafting this edge to this edge right here. So you wanna make sure that you have a nice amount of working yarn. And most of the stuff, if you look it up online, usually suggests, I think, around 4 widths of your seam. I usually like to go 5 or 6, just because I like to give myself plenty of working room. So you want to cut that from your main yarn. You're going to end up needing a needle again. And to do this, we're going to pick up the stitches on the other side of the thumb panel. So, same principle we talked about just a little bit ago. The direction was knit from the bottom up. So we know holding it this way, up is this direction. So we want the edge stitch that is the farthest going towards the top. So it looks like this would be our stitch, but that's not the topmost stitch. That's the stitch that wraps around. So we're going to get that topmost stitch on each bump. And we won't be knitting out from this side. We'll be seaming directly on to these stitches that we're picking up. Remember, we want to get that top one, which is the bump that this previous working yarn is coming out of. So we want that stitch right there. Okay. When you're seaming this, if you've ever worked in Kitchener stitch before, it's that principle. However, we're working in garter stitch. So wow, that's stuck on there really hard. Okay, there we go. So, the whole premise of seaming is you want the stitches to look like they would on the other direction. So normally if we were knitting, we would be using knit stitches this way, because that's how we form our garter stitch. However, since this is the front, this would also correspond to knit stitches since we're working in garter versus stockinette, which would be knit and purl. So you're going to take your two ends and you're going to put front to front. Oh, I forgot to mention that, sorry, this doesn't want to stay on. To do this successfully, you need to make sure that you end on a wrong side row. So even though we're creating ridges here, after you create as many ridges as you need to work one more row so that your working yarn is on a row where the next stitch is a wrong side row. Okay, we're going to put front to front. Now normally when you're doing Kitchener, it's knit, purl, purl, knit. However, since we're doing garter and both sides are knit rows, we're going to start in the back and we're going to always use knit, purl, knit, purl. So to anchor our yarn, we're going to do our purl stitch first, and we are not going to take our yarn off the needle, and we are going to come forward. Because this is a knit row, we are going in as if to knit, sliding that stitch off the needle, and then we're going in to purl. Because our back row is also a knit row, we're doing the same thing. So in that stitch that we just did our purl stitch before, we're going to take our needle and we're going to do a knit stitch. And we're sliding that stitch off the needle and doing a purl stitch in the next one. And all of your ends can get in the way. I don't tend to tighten them up until I get a little further. As we can see here, our yarn went across the needle. You just want to make sure that our seaming is always to the side of the needle so we don't confuse our loops. Okay, so now we're coming back to the front needle. We're doing a knit through that first front needle that we just did a purl on back in the front. Knit, slide it off, and then we are doing a purl through the second one. Pull our strand through. Again, making sure that our yarn is staying under the needle, not on top. Again, in the back, knit, always left through to the right, slide it off of the needle. The next one, we are going in right to left, and that one stays on the needle. And that's what we're going to do through the whole thing. So front again, knit, left side, through to the right. Knit stitches are always going to be slid off, and then we're going to go back through and to purl. Back stitch, back needle, again, from left to right, slide that off the needle, and come in the next one to purl. And we're going to do that the whole way across. As you need to, you can tighten up the stitches. I usually, I'm going to be honest, I don't even use the needle to tighten up the stitches. Well, not the darning needle. I usually use a knitting needle because it's a little firmer for me to get in there. And one of the keys to making seaming look natural is not to tug too hard. So as I go along, I will firm up the stitches. And this is why I use the knitting needle, because my fingers do not fit in there to grab the loops very well. Okay. You can see on the outside, try to tighten them up so they look about the size as the other stitches. But as long as you just pull a little bit and then stretch, they'll be about the right size. That's why I usually work a few and then tighten them up a little bit. Work a few, tighten them up a little bit. That way, as I go along, I can always do a little stretch to make them snug and tight. Okay, so you're just gonna work the rest of the way through your needle, doing the knit purl on both needles, and I'll meet you back at the end. Okay, we have seamed our edge and tightened our stitches. Now we can take our glove or mitt and turn it right side out. You can see now that we have the nice shape. It's always possible, if you prefer to have no real thumb, you can just do your edging here, but we're gonna add a thumb in our tutorial here because I prefer to have some of my thumb covered, and that's how the pattern is written. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up our stitches from our thumb that are on hold. Okay, now that we have all of our stitches on hold on needles, we can take our waste yarn and pull it out of there. Okay, so in the corner here, or not the corner, but where we cast it on and let go of the thumb stitches, we're actually going to pick up one here in the corner, two on the back, and one in the corner. So I'm going to pick up this stitch right here, this one here, oh, sorry about that, there we go, this one here, and the one right here in the corner. So I'm going to grab our yarn. Sorry about that. Whoops. And we're going to start working on our thumb. Keep track of how our rows and our ridges. I'm going to take a marker and I'm just going to mark the last ridge that was made as part of the gusset. So now we're knitting in a round instead of flat. So the first round that we knit, or the first round we work, is going to be knit. You can probably hear my beagle in the background. She's cranky today because it's very cold outside. Okay, so these first 4 stitches are ones that were on waste yarn. And the next 4 are ones we picked up. So a lot about whether you have holes where you pick up stitches depends on the orientation of the stitch and how much slack is there. So the stitch we picked up here was actually a stitch that was running this direction, so it's nice and firm. So we're just going to knit that stitch like regular. Now these ones here though, if we knit it regular, it's going to make a gap. So instead of knitting it regular, we're going to place our needle in and we're actually going to knit through the back loop, twisting the stitch. And that will help firm up any holes that want to be made. Same thing with the next one. If we knit it through this one, it's going to be very open. So we're going to go through and we're actually going to knit through the back of the stitch to twist it and close up any gaps. I'm going to knit regular through the last one. And now we have our stitches for the thumb. I'm going to tuck this tail inside just so it's out of my way. So since we are knitting in the round now, to get our nice garter ridges, we're going to have to purl. So that first stitch, I'm going to make sure that you tighten it up, not too tight, but you don't want there to be a line there. And we're going to purl around. Now, if you need to, depending on what kind of needles you're using, you can always place some type of stitch to let you know when the beginning of the round is. Because I picked them up on needles like this, it's easy for me to differentiate where the beginning of the round is. So I don't feel I need it. And yes, the tiny thumb is a little fiddly, but we're not going to be working on it for very long anyways. Okay, we're going to do one more round of knit and one more round of purl. And then we'll do some decreases just to tighten up our thumb. If you prefer to have your thumb looser, you don't have to do the decreases. There's always in the end too the possibility you could make the thumb longer if you need to, or shorter. I tend to wear my fingerless mitts while I'm walking my dog. So I like to have the top part of my thumb exposed so I don't drop the leash. But all that's up to the individual person. I'm just working these rows on camera here because they're not very long. But if you'd like to skip ahead, you can do so. Okay. After this bit here, we're actually, because we're in garter stitch, we're going to do our decreases on the purl rows after this, because they blend in a little bit better in the garter stitch, I find. So we'll knit one more row even as part of our next ridge. And you'll see the decreases will take place. We have 2 ridges here, so the decreases are going to take place over the 3rd and 4th ridge. And I like to place the decreases in the inside of the thumb near the palm, because that's where your hand is naturally decreasing. Oops. Got talking and forgot what I was doing there. This is also a spot where if you feel like doing a different color, it lends itself to lots of possibilities. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. So, in the pattern, I decrease here, knit around, and decrease here. However, if you want to make it a little more even, you could always make it so you knit a certain amount. I just place them at the beginning of the end of the row, but they can always be more strategically placed. If you wanted to do your first decrease here, or you wanted both of them on the back inside, it's not going to affect it very much. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do purl 2 tug, or just purl 2 together. And then we're just going to give that stitch, not a harsh tug, but a little tug to tighten it up. And then we're going to purl to the end of our row. Okay, and we're going to purl to the last 2. Okay, and then we're going to purl 2 together again. So we're just going to slide our needle under both and work our decrease, pull snug. Next round again, since we just purled, it's going to be a knit row. And that one's just going to be knit completely even around. And if your thumb is smaller, or you like it to have a little bit tighter of a fit, you can always do more than 2 decrease rounds. I would just double check and actually try it on to see how it fits you. Okay, so we are back to our purl row again, and this is going to be our second and our last decrease row. So in the beginning here, we're just going to purl 2 together, slide that needle under both those first 2 stitches, and purl through. A little bit of a tug, and purl across. We're going to keep purling until we hit our last 2 stitches. Oops, almost lost my yarn. Okay, we're at our last 2 stitches. I'm just going to place that needle through both of those stitches and purl 2 together and decrease. So now you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 ridges. I like my thumb, like I said, to be a little bit longer, so I'm going to knit and purl 3 more ridges. So I'll have a total of 7, and I'll come back when we get to that point. Okay, I have my 7 ridges for my thumb. If you would prefer, you can always bind off with your knitting. However, with this pattern, I bind off with crochet. So we're going to take our crochet hook. My DPNs here are 2.25 millimeter, and I'm going to be using a crochet hook that is 2.5 millimeter. It's all going to depend on how your gauge is, but you just want something roughly around the same size. So I'm literally just going to go into the loop like I would with a knitting needle, but I'm going to pull through a crochet hook. Second one, pull through, and then I'm just going to effectively, there's my first single crochet. I go through the next loop. There we go. Pull through and single crochet. And I'm just going to do this all the way around until we have all of our stitches worked. This is the same thing we're going to do to the top and the bottom edges of the mitt. See here how that's looking. I like to do the crochet edge. One, I just like how it looks compared to the knitted bind off. However, I don't know if it's easier or if it's just because I crochet differently than I knit, but for me, it also tends to be an edge that is a little more fitting for me. I tend to have to focus more on knitting when I do bind off, so I don't bind off too tightly. And we're almost there. Okay, now we're going to pull that through, and we are going to cut our end. Okay, so with our top and bottom, we are also going to essentially do the same thing. It'll be a little bit different because we don't have stitches on needles. If you'd like, you could pick them up, but I'm going to show you how to leave them just as is. So the only part I do pick up is the stitches that are on waste yarn. And that's just because I find it personally easier to get the hook from the stitches on the needles than do it on waste yarn most of the time, because otherwise I just catch the waste yarn. So we have all our needles, all of our stitches. We're just going to pull our waste yarn off, and we are going to attach our yarn. So first, just going to go through. Here's our first stitch. Through one more time and pull through for a single crochet. I'm going to do that for each one of the stitches that are on the needle here. And personally, since this one is the top edge where my fingers are and it doesn't have to go around the widest part of my hand, I tend to do this a little more snug That way it'll form a little closer to my fingers. And this is another place, since you're joining a new yarn, that you could always make this a contrasting color of a different sort if you choose. Okay. 2 more stitches here, and then we're going to work on the edge of our garter panel for our hand. Okay, let me set our knitting needle aside there. Okay, ignoring our end to weave in because we have plenty of those. Like we talked about before, garter stitch has a directionality. So you can see here that on the edge, the ridge on the left, is the one that we're going to pick up because that's the one that's closest to the edge for the direction. So our first ridge, it's going to look a little weird because that was our first row. But we're going to pick up, potentially, help if I had fingernails right now, that stitch on the edge, pull through, and crochet. Now because we don't actually have a stitch there and it's a gap, we can always, depending on how snug you want your stitches, you can either pick up this edge loop right here and make another stitch, or you can pick it up along with the garter ridge here on the end. And this would be a case where if you wanted to pick up these stitches with a needle, it might make it easier first. So I'm going to pull them through both of those stitches and then pull it there. And that gives us no gap. So the whole way along, we're going to pick up the one that's farthest to the left and to the edge. Pull through and crochet. Pull through and crochet. And you'll see that once you get past that first row, if your crochet hook is similar to the size of knitting needle that you used, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting your crochet hook through the garter bump loops to crochet the edge. Now it's going to look like the crochet stitches are fairly big to the garter stitches, but you got to remember this is something that we want to stretch some. So even though they look out of proportion, when the fingerless mitt is actually on our hand and the garter panel stretches a little bit, they will be more in proportion to each other. And it's just that easy. We're going to crochet around the whole top edge. Now I'm just doing a single crochet, but if you wanted to do a slip stitch or something else, there's plenty of ways that you could modify these to be more decorative, more complicated, etc. And what we're doing here to the top is exactly what you're going to do to the bottom also. Now I do recommend on the bottom though that you do crochet a little bit looser, and that's because that bottom edge does have to go all the way. I mean, I know it's on your wrist and your arm part, but it does have to stretch over the widest part of your hand. So you do want it to at least be loose enough that it can get over the widest part of your hand. We're almost there. I'm just going to show you the end because I'm going to show you how I'm going to weave in my end here at the end of the edging. And this is another place where if we pull our beginning edge loop, you'll see that there's actually quite a big gap from our last stitch all the way over to our beginning stitch. So if you'd like to close that gap, you can always pick up an extra stitch and crochet it, or you can always do a decrease. So I'm gonna pull these through here, tighten that up, do one more single crochet, and then pull my loop through. And our previous needle that we had waste yarn on, I'm going to pull that off because we do not need our waste yarn anymore. And we're going to weave in our end. So you can wait to do this after you're done also doing the bottom. But since the bottom and the top are the same, I'm not going to go through both of them with you. So to make it look like the crochet edge is never ending, we're going to take it, we're going to go under the first stitch that we made in the beginning, and then we are going to go back through the top here of the last stitch we made. Now this will leave a nice edge that looks continuous. Now what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing to the bottom, and then you're going to weave in all your ends, and we'll come back to see what it looks like. Okay, so now that we have our edges done and our ends are all woven in, you can see that you have a lovely fingerless mitt. Now if you want to, go to the pair that I've already finished. This one, I made them mirror each other. So you'll see when you put them on, you can either have and this looks a little bit different because it's the larger pair because my hands are larger. You can have them like this, or because there is no real right or wrong way with these, you can also have them this way. So I hope you enjoyed making these, and if you have any questions, please leave them below. Welcome to Hesperidium Stitches. Today we will be making the Aurora mitts, or fingerless mitts. So let's get started.